T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We passed T-minus 60. 55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong just reported back. It's been a real smooth countdown. We passed the 50-second mark. Power transfer is complete. We're on internal power with the launch vehicle at this time. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Power clear.
Well, hello and welcome to the Bullpen. We're here with a special live edition with the practitioner of draft analysis. I was trying to play on doctor stuff there, but John's here with us, John Crumpler, and as always, Tom is with us. How are y'all doing today?
I'm doing great. James. Thank you. You as well, Tom, guys, for having me on. I'm excited to talk some draft. And I did like the play on words. You were close there. A little workshopping. We can get something going with that. I could copyright it.
You could do it. I think so. I didn't tell you before. I wanted to spring it on you. I wanted it to be a surprise. But yeah, John knows his stuff when it comes to draft talk. It's fitting that he's our next guest after Jason Braddock, both guys that I really, love the content you guys put out when it comes to talking about draft prospects. So we'll dive into it in a minute, but as kind of an icebreaker, let's talk about the news that's happened today. The Texans are right at the center of it. The NFL's just released that there will be the ability to have a third helmet for all the teams. And John, I don't know how interested you are in the uniform side of things, but I guess we're going to find out here in a second. We'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the possibilities with this third helmet the Texans could have? What would you want to see? What do you think they're actually going to do?
I mean, it sounds like a lot of people are on Twitter right now talking about a white helmet. Could there be an H-Town blue helmet? Although I don't know how different that would be from the current blue helmet. I'd love to see kind of like Eagles or Vikings-esque, some horns, like bilaterally. That could be neat. But you ask how interested I am. I mean, look good, feel good, play good, right? If the Texans look good out there, they're going to win more football games. I don't make the rules. That's just how it works.
That's how it goes. Tom, how do you feel about it?
I agree with John. Dion said it best. You look good, you play good, you feel good, the whole nine. I mean, I think the white would really, really, really make a lot of sense. I've seen too many edits in the white for it not to be something that I would absolutely be on board for. I don't know how I feel about the whole H-Town blue thing on the helmet. I'm cool with the idea of a jersey. I don't know if I want it on a helmet. But I'm excited for new uniforms, period, just because I don't know how long we've been waiting for something other than, I guess, the red. And we're, 10 days away? 13 days away, something like that?
13 days, yeah. I mean, I think we'd have to know more about what the Texans have done with the uniforms themselves. I know there are some people that have seen them, but I think white, without knowing anything, makes the most sense because it's the most versatile. You get the all-white look. You can wear it with just about any uniform combination. H-Town blue, I think, is limiting. And I think so is black, unless there's like a new space-themed uniform they're coming out with that is black.
I just hope they do something fun with it. Like I don't want a third helmet with the logo on it. Like whether it's a new secondary logo that we're going to see or they change the colors with the logo. I just hope that because Nike will get creative, and that's why they've had some really ugly uniforms like over the last decade. Like they're gonna miss sometimes, and I'm not afraid for them to miss. Like walk up to the plate, like be Brian Abreu. Like don't be afraid to. You might strike out, but just go swing hard. And if it doesn't work out, we'll get over it. The red looks great.
I can't get over the lead up to that. Like Nike gets really creative, even though sometimes they don't really do very good at it.
We have to acknowledge some of them are really bad, but you can't get great without, some tumbles along the way.
I mean, if
I feel like Nike
you end up in the stars,
I feel like Nike never misses with the Oregon Ducks uniforms, though. For whatever reason, every one of them is a banger after banger after banger. I am curious. You did point out about an alternate logo. What would you think about that H that is kind of surfaced and moved around? Would that look good on a helmet, you think?
I think the H would look good. I'm telling you, I'd like horns. I could do something with, like, if they want to play. I guess they can't really play with the star in the logo because of Dallas and what they've done already. So you're limited with what you put there. But I think the H would look good, and they've been promoting that script a good bit as well. So that would look clean. I'd like that.
I know that D Texan did an edit. I posted the picture of it with the Texans logo on it, but that same edit, he posted it with the H, and I thought it looked good. That was the earliest point where I was like, oh yeah, H-Town Blue like actually could look really good if it's done right. Like, cause I don't know, I'm a younger Texans fan. I have some appreciation for it, but I think, I don't know, leave the past in the past. But
Tom, I like you bring up that organs are always good. And I do have to imagine it has something to do with Phil Knight. The CEO walks down, who's an alumni who gets it, and the bad ones, he just like, who did this? You're fired. Get out of here. We can't give the people. I can't see my friends and promote this.
I imagine every one of them has to go through his office. Like, he has to personally bless it. Like, nothing gets put out without Phil Knight going, yes, no, absolutely not. Okay, that might work. Yeah, 100%.
100%. Well, with that, let's get into what we came here for, which is draft talk. We'll start with the most obvious topic, which is I want to get your take on this. So the Texans traded for Stephon Diggs. I think a lot of people, it depends on who you asked, but I felt like there was a growing contingent of people that believed that in the first 2 or 3 rounds, the Texans were going to get a wide receiver because it was, in this league with the way the scheme is set up, a starting caliber third wide receiver is pretty vital to success. We've seen it on other teams. With the trade for Stephon Diggs, do you think that affects the Texans taking a wide receiver in the draft? Or do you think there's a prospect that you have in mind that they could take at a certain point in the draft?
I mean, it certainly does affect what you're going to do with those early picks when we're talking about, picks in the first 3 rounds. Personally, I view those as you are hoping to get day one contributors at not special teams, at your core positions. And when you bring in a guy like Stephon Diggs, we can say whatever we want about the compensation or what they've done with the contract. In 2024, the Texans are going to have the best 3 wide receiver 11 personnel set in the league. And that means if you take a guy on day 2, and there might be some really good value for that still, but that guy's not going to play a lot unless someone gets injured. And maybe you do want to hedge your bets with what's happened with Tank is a smaller player, with Nico's pretty extensive injury history through 3 years. But I think especially for 42 and 59, this probably pushes receiver down the board and lets them feel a little more comfortable about being aggressive with the defensive pieces that they need to add if D'Amico Ryans is going to watch his unit take the leap that everyone is kind of hoping for in year 2. With that said, would it shock me if they took one? I would not be surprised, just because the class is, and I think everyone who's been following this draft, this is an incredible receiver class. There's a lot of talent. There are double-digit guys who deserve to be taken in the first 2 days. So if at 59, if a guy like Roman Wilson's still on the board, who you think in a year, if Stephon Diggs gets expensive, or if you're not able to come to terms of Nico Collins could complement 2 outside receivers well, while also having some versatility to play the Z, I think you could take a guy like that. But my initial reaction is this probably takes receiver off the board in round 2.
Yeah, I could imagine that's where I'm at. It in round 2 specifically. I'll even go more specific at 42, assuming the Texans don't trade. Is there a position you think is clearly the one that's going to have, based on where you view prospects going, how you've mocked it, that the Texans would be going for at a different position?
The problem is that Nick Caserio loves to trade for every single pick that he wants to make. Last year, I believe, so they traded up for Will Anderson, of course, but then they traded up for Juice Scruggs. They traded up for Tank Dell. So do I believe that they'll stay put at 42? No, which makes things a little bit more complicated in terms of what the board is going to look like. I think that's a defensive player. Personally, there are 3 spots that stand out, probably 2 more than the others. Defensive tackle. Right now, that is a position that you're trusting to be completely rotational. There's not a guy that you're probably going to want playing more than like 55% of the snaps that they currently have on the roster. And then at cornerback, I think you like Jeff Okudah, you like CJ Henderson, the talent there. But one, there's a reason both of these players were available in free agency. Neither of them stuck in the league the way that you hoped when they were top 10 picks in 2020. But additionally, they've got their own injury history. So I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to upgrade at corner. And that's where I think if one of those top guys started to tumble down the board, and the same could be said for defensive tackle, you could see Nick Caserio trade up. So personally, I think defensive tackle, corner, unless the value gets too good. And we can talk about specific players, but there are some really good linebackers. So I think once you get into the middle of the second round, you might feel comfortable there.
All right, Tom, you're up.
The question I have for you, sir, is we just outlined how wide receivers deep, you feel linebackers deep, of say safety, corner, D tackle. Which one of those groupings do you feel isn't deep and they should probably prioritize if given the opportunity with those 2 second-round picks?
It's complicated. So I would say that safety is the position on the team that has to be addressed for me personally. And that's for 2 reasons. One, Jimmy Ward was your best safety last year, but that is a player who was not healthy in 2023. And generally those things do not get better as players age, especially over the age of 30. And then Jalen Petrie, after a really strong rookie campaign, he regressed in a lot of ways. And when he didn't have those volume tackle opportunities that he had in 2022, I think even common fans started to notice, hey, like some of the misses that propped up in his rookie year. And I think they started to come up more. And then some of like just how he struggled with the coverage responsibilities, like on the back end of D'Amico Ryan's defense. I wouldn't feel comfortable with everything else that you put into this roster when you've traded a second round pick for Stephon Diggs just for 1 year. This is an all-in team. I think that's a position that they should address just to give themselves some leeway if either guy gets injured or Petrie doesn't bounce back. But the issue for me is I'm not sure that's where the value on the board is. I've started to look at those guys a little more recently, but there's also a very saturated veteran market, and this team still has some cap space to play with after restructuring both Shaq Mason and Titus Howard. So I think it's not a great answer. I'm sorry, a bit nuanced, but I think safety is the position they have to address. But is it the best position in the draft? Do you want a rookie to be the person that's going to patrol the back end and need to kind of understand some of the more complex parts of D'Amico Ryan's scheme compared to how he solidifies things for his corners or simplifies things for his corners or his front four? I'm not sure.
Is there a particular safety that like sticks out to you that would be available, say, in the second, third round that the Texans could be looking for?
Yeah, I got to watch some all 22 on him today. And this is a guy that I was talking about back at the Senior Bowl, Javon Bullard for the Georgia Bulldogs, multi-year starter for Kirby Smart's defense in Athens. And I think he brings a lot of things to the table that you would want. Above average athlete. Georgia trusted him to patrol the back end a lot. Very disciplined player. When you watch him, I think he's aware of what his responsibilities were in that defense. And he was asked to do a lot of things, whether that was patrolling the back end, transitioning into man coverage when players went into motion, or crashing down to make good tackles. Takes really good angles on receivers and coming at the ball carrier. I think Bullard is a guy that you could see probably at 59. I think 42 could be a little rich, especially if it doesn't surprise me Nick Caserio moves up a few spots into those 30s. But with that second round pick, I would love to see the University of Georgia safety brought in. I think he'd be a good fit.
No, yeah, 100%. Now, speaking to the roster and just looking at the Texans themselves, I think personally a lot of people are looking at Azeez Al-Shaair and Christian Harris, and they're going, we've got Toa as backup. We've got 2 great linebackers. Like, what are we looking at? Why would we even look to get one high in the draft? How do you feel about the linebacker position for the Texans, and do you think it's imperative to address it early in the draft?
I think they're well positioned at linebacker currently. I think Christian Harris is a blossoming star at that weak side linebacker position. Azeez Al-Shaair is someone that should come in and be a pretty natural fit at middle linebacker, just of how he can play the run. He's a above average coverage defender. But if you want to talk about, I guess, the responsibilities of this defense and what DeMeco Ryans has done previously, he puts a lot on his linebackers. And so that leaves me two questions: is, are they comfortable with Henry To'oTo'o at that strong side linebacker position, even if they're going to play a lot of nickel where that strong side might not be on the field? He's, I think it's fair to call him a liability in coverage. I don't want to be mean. I just think it was very easily seen on the field last year that teams threw at To'oTo'o when he was on the field. And also, are you comfortable with Azeez as your endpoint at the middle linebacker position? And I think that's where guys like Edgerrin Cooper, who people love from Texas A&M, he's someone that could step in, and maybe at first he is that strong side linebacker. He's someone who plays the run. He's so instinctive about it. He's violent, which I think this team will really like, just with how he initiates contact. But then he's got this athleticism that he could blossom into that middle linebacker that DeMeco Ryan, I mean, we watched what he did with Fred Warner in San Francisco. And of course, that's the level of success that's so difficult to replicate. But if they took a linebacker early, I think you could justify just from saying this is a defense that wants to task its linebackers with a lot of responsibility, to be frank. And he might have a different angle than what Azeez is bringing to the table, even though they did pay him nicely. I mean, 8 figures on a 3-year deal. I think he's coming in over $10 million per season. I could see the team saying the talent is right here for what we think this player can be. Maybe not in year 1 for what we need, but in year 2.
No, yeah, 100%. I mean, if I'm a linebacker, I'm praying the Texans draft me just because of DeMeco and what I watched happen with Christian Harris this past season. But Tom, what's up?
The other position I think on the defensive line that I think a lot of people have talked about is D tackle. I don't know well enough about college D tackles to know, I guess, really where the Texans could be looking. We've mocked on Mondays for a while now, and there's been a lot of names that I've seen that sure, they sounded good on paper, but I guess for scheme fit, is there a D tackle that you could see in that, maybe third, fourth round where the Texans could go? Or is there somebody they need to move up that Casero could move up into the 30s like you spoke to?
Yeah, so I'll speak to both of that. I think when we're talking about defensive tackle, I'm comfortable with what they've done in this 4-3 defense, really you have your one technique. So that's someone who's going to kind of be shadowed over the shoulder of the center. And then you have a 3 technique who's going to play over the guard. A little wider than that. And I think for the one guy, someone who's going to take on multiple blocks, that's a big part of your run game just because you get those inside gaps. I like Foley there. I think he doesn't need to be a difference maker on passing downs of what he can do. But when we look at the defensive tackle position for the Texans, that 3 technique or your guys who are going to pass rush from the defensive tackle position, that's where my questions start to arise. So when I'm looking at defensive tackle for the Texans, I want someone who is fast, who's strong enough that they either need to push the pocket, or they need to be able to win one-on-one against these interior linemen. So a name that I would love to see them trade up for, and it's possible with kind of how his draft process is going to be Illinois' Johnny Newton. That's someone we were talking about at 23 overall before the trade back. But with this broken foot and kind of with some of the elevation of these other players, it wouldn't surprise me if he started to tumble into the 30s. If he got out of day 1, maybe that's someone that Nick Caserio targets to go up and get. And now if they want to stay at 42, there are a couple guys. Braden Fiske, he does have these shorter arms, which is going to be a concern for some team, but his ability to get after the passer and just really be a disruptive force as a pass rusher from that spot, it's going to get him drafted early. And I think it's something this team would covet. Michael Hall from Ohio State is another name I would look at. I would be amiss. I feel like I have to talk about, and also guys, I feel like I'm talking so much. So if you want to interject to any of these, please.
I feel like you're about to say what I was about to ask you.
You about to ask about Devondre Sweat?
Yeah, I wanted to hear what you have to say about.
Okay, I feel like any Houston Texans conversation about defensive tackle, we have to talk about Devondre. We got to talk about the University of Texas kid, and I actually did a full write-up on him last week, and I came away. I'm impressed. You don't find a lot of guys like him. Even though Dan Brugler wrote today that scouts believe he was playing this season at Texas close to 380. He refused to weigh in at the Senior Bowl, which would support that because by the combine he got got down to 365 pounds. And people have asked, like, is that a player that would work into D'Amico Ryan's defense when you talk about this archetype of someone who can play the 3-tech, can push the pocket, can, win one-on-one quickly and attack the quarterback. And to that note, no. But when we talk about that one spot, that guy who's really going to eat blockers and can make a difference there if they are going to get multiple blockers one-on-one, I think T'Vondre Sweat could work well. Of course, there are these personal issues now, but he would change how the Texans play the run. I think that even though he's not going to win, he's a better pass rusher than people give him credit for. But when you have that much mass, he collapses the pocket just by the fact that the human body cannot stop that much force coming at you, and you're not allowed to push them forward like you are in run blocking. Like, he's going to move bodies. He's going to collapse the interior pockets. I think it would work. I think it'd probably displace Foley Fatukasi, who we just talked about, from the starting lineup potentially, or at least make that pretty rotational. But he's someone that maybe he's not worth a top 60 pick for this defense, but in light of recent events with the DUI and with some teams a little sour on that profile, if we're talking round 3, would I be happy if it's T'Vondre Sweat pick? Absolutely. I think he could make a difference in the defense.
100%. Now, we have a lot of people in the chat that are discontent with the safety conversation we just had, but the question that I want to draw from the chat, it doesn't have anything to do with that. There are some people that are saying, maybe, how are we going to address offensive line? And that's a common theme. I've noticed there's a lot of people that are like, the offensive line needs to improve. How do we address the offensive line? So my question to you is who are some prospects that you could see the Texans approaching, and how early do you think in the draft they might actually go ahead and address depth on the offensive line, which is really what I think they would be doing, drafting an offensive line.
All right, before we go into this, I got to embarrass myself. Guys, I'm so adamant they should not draft offensive line. I have not watched any offensive linemen in this class. I watched the Senior Bowl. I watched them in drills so I could pay attention to the defensive linemen. But in my opinion, it is not when you're this all in and where you need accelerating pieces for what you've already gotten, I would not invest high draft capital like before the 5th round on offensive line. And this is why, for anyone watching, I wrote a piece. You can go back and read it. I think the temptation at the time was to think, it was entitled, "How Can the Texans Run the Ball Better in 2024?" And of course, there's a picture of Saquon. Everyone wanted to talk about Saquon at the time. But a point I would make is, you're locked in at left tackle. Laramie Tunsil's getting paid a lot of money. You're locked in at right tackle. Titus Howard is getting paid a lot of money. You're locked in at left guard or right guard. Shaq Mason is going to be there. He's getting paid a lot of money. And then when you look at the last 2 drafts, you took Kenyon Green 13th overall for this exact reason, to be a run-mauling left guard that could set the tone for a team that wants to run the ball. And you just took 2 centers who both played pretty well, by the way. And I think Juice Scruggs, despite playing out of position, I don't think he's big enough to play guard. I think he's going to be a better player when he gets moved to center. So if I'm the Houston Texans, how do I get better on offensive line? 1, I get healthy. And 2, if you go look at these numbers from teams that run this Shanahan offense that Slowix comes from, everybody runs the ball better in year 2. The backs figure it out. The linemen figure it out. I would just organically trust this thing to bake. And at left guard, let Kendrick Green and Kenyon Green and whoever else wants to, broker, battle for that position, let them figure it out. But I think this team has invested enough resources at offensive line that at some point you got to say enough is enough.
You don't think so? The only depth that they have at tackle, as far as I understand it, is Charlie Heck. So there's no reason to. So you're saying like maybe 5th round or later they could draft a tackle.
I guess in the 4th round you could watch it, but for me, I just haven't spent a lot of time at it because that is not a priority for the Texans. It should not be, because I mean, if this team is going to hit the ceiling that it needs to, that you want it to hit, I would say you need these guys to play. Like, you have to bet at some point that these guys are going to play. There's a great expression from coaching. I can't remember who said this, but it was before a Super Bowl, and they were talking about, it was either Peyton Manning or Drew Brees, if they got hurt. And one of the coaches was like, should we get the backup quarterback some reps? And he was like, well, then we're fucked. And we don't practice fucked. And I think that might be, we don't practice screwed. So I would just say, like, with the tackle situation, you want another guy, sure, but I'm not sure that I'm investing major capital to prevent a collapse at that position.
And to be fair, the Texans' offensive line depth showed up far better than I think a lot of people thought it would. But Tom, it sounded like you had a question earlier.
Well, it was more a comment. John, thank you so much. We've been banging this drum for a while now. We've been talking about, it seems like we ask these questions. We got Jason Braddock on, we get all these people on, and they're like, what about the offensive line? And we keep saying the offensive line is not the issue. But I do believe the reason that everyone's asking about offensive line is because I don't know if it was McShay or if it was Kuiper, but one of them in one of their mocks early had the Texans taking an offensive lineman with the 23rd pick.
It felt like every national mock draft had that.
And we couldn't understand where they were getting this. Oh yeah, the Texans would be better if they grabbed an offensive lineman.
They drafted Tyler Guyton.
Yeah.
I
think that's the last thing everybody's got on their well, if McShay and Kuiper said it's got to be true. And we've never subscribed to that.
By the way, just for kicks, I did look up. So the quote, it was John Gruden asked Tom Moore why Peyton Manning's backups did not get more reps. And he said, if 18 goes down, we don't practice. So, yeah, I also would say that the national media doesn't know Titus Howard exists. It's very unfortunate, but I don't think they have any idea who Titus Howard is, nor that the Houston Texans are paying him $18 million per year to play right tackle.
Pretty much. I mean, I think they saw him shift to left guard and they just didn't think twice about it, which is unfortunate. But I feel like so we got a question from our Discord that I feel kind of pertains to this conversation just a little bit. So I'll segue into it. Tyler from the Discord wants your thoughts on the running back room. The prospects that he brought up are Estime and Benson. But when do you think the Texans are going to address running back, if at all, in the draft? You kind of spoke to it earlier, how you think this is a system that just gets better in year two. But what backs do you think, they've interviewed a few, could possibly thrive in this system?
I mean, obviously they're going to want a back that can run zone. That's why we saw such a disappointing sophomore campaign from Dameon Pierce, just someone who was not ready to let the runs develop the way they needed to. And now that they've traded for Joe Mixon, how I see this backfield playing out, Mixon, I mean, he's proven himself. He can carry the majority of the load in that scheme. So I don't think they necessarily have to go out and find someone who even needs to project to play a big role. They might just want to find a running back who can better pass protect than Joe Mixon on third down. That was an issue when you go back and watch him on Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati was putting tight ends in the backfield to block on third down. So I think that we might not be talking enough about Joe Mixon. When he was on the field, he was there to run the ball or run around. Or you're looking for someone who can be a little more dynamic when they are running those routes. So if you want to go the third down direction late, I think you could do that. Or if you look at Mixon's deal, it was just $13 million guaranteed. He's getting paid $9 million a year. So if you want to get out of this after 1 year, I don't think that's necessarily prohibitive for you. And if someone falls, this is a class that there's not a premier guy, but there's a lot of guys that have late second, third round grades. So I love they brought up Trey Benson. He's someone I watched last week. He's my probably between RB1, RB2 in the class. Jonathan Brooks from Texas is also fantastic. Probably should be RB1. It's unfortunate that the ACL injury kind of stole his ability to stand out in a weak class. But if the Texans want to spend the 86th pick on a running back of the future and someone they can ease into this system in a way that isn't dissimilar that Derrick Henry in his first year with the Titans, I don't think they draft someone that high, but he didn't get a lot of run at all as a rookie. And, they kind of went 60-40. And then the next year they let DeMarco Murray go out the door. Derrick Henry came in and became what we know him today. If there's someone they identify for the system that can do that, I would have no issue taking a back on day two. But realistically, it makes a lot of sense in that fourth round range. Can you add something to your room who might be able to contribute more on third down than Mixon? And I think we would say Pierce is not exactly a pass catching specialist either.
What are your thoughts on Pierce? I'll bring that up too, because one of the things that was said in this is that they believe in Dameon Pierce. So what are your thoughts on how he'll do this next season?
I believe in Dameon Pierce and that I want him on the roster. Do I believe in Dameon Pierce that I am allocating a large role for him before the season? I wouldn't think so. I mean, he even talked on Sports Radio 610 last year and just said that the offense wasn't going to get the version of himself that they needed to be successful. And what a wildly transparent quote from a professional athlete. We just don't see guys talk about themselves like that all the time. And to me, that signals someone. I mean, if you want to improve at something, self-awareness, it has to come first. You have to know that has to improve. And I think Pierce is if he's here, he's going to have to get better at this. He can't just wait until he's going to get to go to another team and get to run a power scheme. No, I think this is someone who's going to work and get better at this. And this guy has a lot of talent. It's just his bread and butter is initiating contact and getting slippery, kind of being powerful when he does that. And that doesn't allow blocks to develop in this scheme. Can that change someone who, I guess it's really like, can a tiger change their stripes or whatever the expression would be? If this is how he's played football his entire life, can he do that differently? I don't know. But what we saw in year one was enough that I would certainly let him try to figure it out for another training camp.
For sure. Tom.
I couldn't have said it better myself because I believe I said the exact same thing after he
Tom
made that
the
comment.
President of the Dameon Pierce.
I was at the game when he ran it back, and then they interviewed him, and then it was basically him saying, "Look, this is not what I'm accustomed to," and I thought the exact same thing you thought. The transparency was enough for me, and him saying it was going to take me an off season. Everybody was, everybody was very like cool with the fact that he was going to have to learn a new system. And I hope, for nothing else, because he did that we get the best version of Dameon Pierce at some point in a Texans uniform.
I mean, it'd be a hell of a story if 31, is taken over again by midseason and he's figured it out, and that can be a 1-2 punch of Mixon. I'm all for it. I'm rooting for it to happen, but I think the Texans have probably done the right thing to insulate themselves against if that outcome doesn't come to fruition.
100%. I mean, I agree with you. It's always about what's best for the Texans, what's going to make them better. But I don't know. I haven't really seen it, but I mean, I think the transparency, I agree, is something to appreciate when we're talking about Dameon Pierce and his place on this roster. Looking deeper in the draft, so a prospect that I actually was put on to by you. So this should be, I think it should be a pretty easy question. We'll see. But in the fourth round or roundabouts, there's some people that are projecting tight ends to the Texans. I'd like to get your view on the Texans tight end situation as it pertains to the scheme they run and if they should add one. Theo Johnson is a name that comes up a lot for me. I really like him out of Penn State. But I mean, what are your thoughts?
You like Theo Johnson? I love Theo Johnson. I've loved Theo Johnson since I talked to him at the Senior Bowl. So yeah, this is a layup question for me. I can talk all day about Theo. So what's the Texans tight end situation? I think they're probably in a good spot coming into 2024. You've got Dalton Schultz on this big extension. He's going to play pretty much every down for you. And then Tegan Catoriano was drafted. I mean, pretty late investment. He was a 6th round pick out of Oregon State.
I want to say he was undrafted.
No, they definitely drafted him.
Did they draft him?
When they draft someone, I don't know. I always remember it because I'm like, why did I do this homework on the draft if Nick Caserio is just going to be like this guy? And it happens every year. I can't get deep enough into it to know everybody. But all that to say, and then Brevin Jordan, of course, had a really nice end of the year. So if you're looking at the Texans, the one thing I would say, and of course, everybody's ready for them to be, this Madden-esque shotgun air raid offense, like Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, let's cook. I'm not sure that's Bobby Slowik's DNA, and I'm sure that will change slightly, but this is still a team that in 2023, their identity came from at least persistently working to run the football and then tying a lot of concepts to how they ran it and putting defenses in a situation where they weren't allowed to hone in on at the time was limited weapons. That's not going to be a problem anymore, but I can't see them abandoning the run game. And to that note, I mean, still about a little over 10% of snaps were 12 personnel. So 1 running back, 2 tight end. I would not be against taking another tight end, just someone, if you think that you could put on the field who, one's going to be a really reliable blocker, but 2, maybe represents a different receiving threat than what you're talking about with Tegan and a better blocker than what you're talking about with Brevin Jordan. So Theo Johnson, you bring him up in the 4th round. I think he has the athletic traits. For those who are familiar with Math Bomb, the relative athletic score, I think we all love those cards when they come out around the combine. I think he's now either the 10.0 or he's the 9.99 for tight ends. So Theo Johnson, I grew up in Canada, played at Penn State. This terrible offense, it's quite unpleasant to watch, but he did catch a ton of touchdowns for the Nittany Lions. And for me, that's a skill set that teams are going to want to roll the dice on in the top 100. I could see him as kind of one of those like compensatory third round picks or late third, just because this was a guy who did run solid routes. I thought he was the best tight end in the Senior Bowl. He was voted as such by his peers. He has all this athletic potential, and he'd come in day one. He's not going to be a liability. He's a blocker. He's got the athleticism to do something in space. But if a player like that fell, or you're talking about another name people love would be Cade Stover, CJ Stroud's former teammate at Ohio State. Is it Sino or Sinet?
I couldn't tell you. That's one of those things, like when we signed Danielle Hunter, the first time we did a podcast about it, I was like, yeah, Danielle Hunter. And then I finally like watched NFL Network and was like, oh, it's not said that way. Okay, so I'm not the one to ask as to how you say that, but I do like that you brought up scheme fit, because the follow-on question for that tight end question is if the Texans add a tight end or not. The question becomes, you have already expressed in your answer that you think that Slowick is not someone to switch to just running, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, or maybe like just spreading it out, running this shotgun set and just going after it with this air raid scheme or whatever. It was said all of last season how skillful he was at coordinating 2 wide receivers on the field and getting 1 open, which is apparently pretty difficult. It sounds like it. But a lot of people have questions about Brevin Jordan's role in the offense already, with the addition of Stephon Diggs and, understanding that Dalton Schultz is a really good tight end. So, schematically, where do you find Brevin Jordan after the dust settles?
Brevin Jordan benefited for sure from Dalton Schultz missing some time. I also think the Texans were forced to get really creative of what kind of personnel they were going to use once Tank Dell went down. Simply, you just didn't have enough guys that could separate on the team. John Mechie was not a starting caliber NFL wide receiver last year. Like, if we're being very frank, Noah Brown was playing through a terrible back injury, and then teams were, bracketing Nico Collins, and you either could get it to Nico, and when you did, you won big. Indianapolis, they decided to play a bunch of cover 3. That was awesome. I think Nico had 190 yards. And then in Cleveland, Nico once again had a huge game. But the games where that didn't work out, I think specifically, Nico wasn't available in this game, but the Jets game. And then you talk about the divisional loss to Baltimore, it just didn't happen. So I think at some point they were throwing spaghetti at the wall saying, can anything work? Can we find a group of pass catchers that can draw attention away from our number 1 wide receiver, or at least some guys who are going to get separation and actually win so that CJ Stroud can get them the ball? And that's probably not going to be an issue this year. So how much do you even need to run 2 tight end personnel? And when you do, I think that you might want the threat of the run to be the most, you need it to be the most pressing issue for the defense, because that's why you're putting that out there. You want that unit to be able to run very effectively. And even if it can't, which that's a different discussion, you need them to be terrified that it is going to be effective. So could Brevin Jordan, I thought he improved as a blocker last year. By all accounts, he had a really nice season, but at the end of the day, he's on the 4th year of his rookie contract. If they wanted to get someone cost controlled and someone who maybe can be more of an impact on those running downs when they're out in 12 personnel, I would understand that.
Oh yeah. Tom.
We've talked at length about some players and some position groups and stuff like that. This is more just kind of what you think the draft is going to look like. If you're sitting in Vegas and you walk up to the sports book and you see Nick Caserio draft day trades over under 1.5, which way are you going?
I'll take the over. For sure. He can't help himself. Did they trade up for Davis Mills? I know they traded up for Nico Collins. They traded 3 picks for Nico.
I don't think they traded up for Davis
I thought that
Mills.
Was their pick.
Okay, that was their pick.
That was their pick, yeah.
But they did trade up for Garrett Wallow. They couldn't wait for him. Had to have Garrett Wallow on the roster. And then the year prior, so that they stayed for Stingley, they traded back for Kenyon Green, but they came up for Christian Harris. They came up for John Mechie.
Do you
want to say
think
they
that
made
that
a
has
day
something to
three.
do with like the mentality? Like, do you think that sometimes he goes, I like this guy and I know that I could get him, like toe to toe. I think he traded up for toe to toe. I'm almost certain of it. And do you think he's like, I can motivate toe to toe to be a better player if I trade up 3 picks to get him? And
I mean,
so, like, I don't know. Do you think that plays into it?
I think it's just Nick Casario's draft strategy. I bet that the Texans have a very small draft board for the things they're looking for, whether that's how players operate off the field, like how they work. And then you whittle that down to the players whose talent you're actually interested in. And an important consideration with Casario is someone's described him to me as he's a grocery shopper. So like he needs a great chef, but if he has that, like, oh, he can get them exactly what they need to cook that masterpiece. So in year 1 and year 2, he's going out to get these very specific ingredients. They're taking those targeted looks, and there's no one who can cook the meal. So it looks
He's
like a
going to Whole
disaster.
Foods for a
He's
guy who
going
can cook
exactly.
cereal.
He's not buying discounts, and that's part of why I had such a big problem with Nick Casario in the first 2 years, because I was like, when you're terrible, you just need to throw darts at the board. I was like, look at what the Los Angeles Rams did. They took 13 rookies. Look at what the Indianapolis Colts did. They took 12 rookies. Like, just continue to take those shots. But that doesn't seem to be their strategy. And I think it's just one way to play. There's 2 ways to play the draft. You can either assume that it's an exercise in randomness, that there's, it's limited information and there's all these things that are going to factor in, that maybe it works, maybe it won't. Or it's you play it that you trust there are tiers of players and exactly who's going to fit. And I think Casario falls into that latter category with how he's run the Texans so far. So that it's the draft's a value exercise. And I think that's just who Casario is and how he wants to run the team.
No,
I
yeah.
post- Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, you go ahead, Tom. You go
I
ahead.
pose the question because I feel like this roster, for the most part, is already pretty constructed. I don't know that all these draft picks would necessarily make this roster. So I'm kind of curious, does he make a trade simply for the fact that, well, I'm not going to carry 6 guys with me or 7 guys with me from, the first 6 rounds? The chances that all of them make the team, they're probably going to be practice squad guys. So from that aspect, I see him making trades simply because you can only carry 53.
No, and that's a great point, and why it was so frustrating in the first 2 drafts, especially, where it's like you took 5 rookies in 2021. Like, what do we need to have Christian Kirksey on the roster? Like, are you worried about if we got to cut? Who did they have? Who was the Colts running back? It was a big deal when they signed him. Marlon Mack.
Marlon
you
Mack.
got to make sure Marlon Mack makes the team. But now this is a totally different team. This is not the 2021, 2022 Texans. This is a Super Bowl contender, at least according to Vegas. And I think we would talk about them that way. So yeah, it is going to be difficult for rookies, especially day 3 rookies, to make this team. It wouldn't surprise me to say, hey, it's a pretty, like, that we don't have a lot of roles that we're going to trust younger guys to fill. If we think there's a teardrop from the quality of player we're going to get, why would we burn it on a guy who might not make the roster when we can burn it on someone who we'll feel really confident can contribute in a way that we need for this season?
100%. That grocery metaphor you made earlier, it's not necessarily related to the discussion, but I have to get it out there. It made me think of that one clip that's been going around of Michael Irvin where he's like, "We're losing the recipes." I don't know.
I haven't seen that. You're gonna have to DM me that.
I'm gonna have to send it to you. It's freaking been stuck in my head. I've been trying to find a way to like meme it into Texans Twitter. I just haven't found like the thing to put it to. We're too good for that. Like, we're not losing any recipes. Maybe I use it with the Astros.
If you bookmark something long enough, you'll find a way. At least in my experience, I'm like, if I see a video that I think is hilarious, it's like I will stretch the context so far if I need to, but like this will be Texans related.
I'll sit there. I posted a video a while ago. It was that one woman that like her husband said he wanted brownies, and she like made the chocolate like from scratch over 3 weeks. And I was like, the Texans in 2021 when I asked them to win football games. And
that's good.
I don't think it was a long joke. I don't think the context really landed the way I wanted it to. But I'm gonna put it
all
out
on Twitter going, what does he mean? I don't understand. What does the Texans and chocolate have anything to do
Why
with
is James
Roy
Roy posting this video of this woman making chocolate from scratch? What's going on? Losing the recipes. No. But I mean, Nick Casario, I've stopped trying to understand him. I don't know. The earliest impression that I had of him is he's really good at saying a lot of words without really saying anything at all. And I've come to appreciate that about him because it means that no one outside of the organization is going to know anything about anything when it comes to what the Texans want. It's Fort Knox in there. I couldn't guess what's going on in their brains. It's just
Those
D'Amico
press
and
conferences are such a disaster. Well, they're not a disaster. Like, they're very well run, obviously. But you go in, and it's like, okay, I got to watch this. Like, there might be something in here that I need to write about, or for you, it's like that I'm going to want to talk about on the podcast. And without fail, every time, maybe there's one quote where it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, there's actually something useful. Otherwise, it's just like word salad. Like, he just has figured out every way to say something like that is objectively true, but that reveals nothing about what he believes about football that would be different from any of the other 31 general managers. It's impressive.
I think it's the last inkling of the Patriot way that we've got going on down in Houston. I feel like that's definitely very New England in its dynasty era esque, if you will. But Tom, do you have any final thoughts before we kind of bring this thing to a close?
I'm pretty good, John. I really appreciate it. Can't wait for the draft. I'm dying to know what all of these trades are going to be, since we clearly think there's going to be at least two, and see what they end up with so we can figure out what it's going to look like.
No, draft's going to be a lot of fun. I can't believe that we're already 2 weeks out.
Dude, I'm so excited. Tom says it every week when we go. I say, any final thoughts? He says, yeah, I want the draft tomorrow and the season to start the next day. That's his catchphrase. So I couldn't agree more. I mean, that would be ideal. If I was like making the schedule for football, I would just cancel the rest of the days and make it to where the season ends and then it begins again with the draft somewhere in there. You know? I've told people before, there was a point, I think it was just being a Texans fan during the bad years, which there's been plenty of, that makes you really like the draft almost more than the regular season. You're just like, how can I make this team better? So I'm excited for the draft.
It honestly has been a weird transition. Like, someone commented this Monday, they were like, can you start changing up the players in your mock drafts? I was like, guys, we pick in the second round. There are two needs on the team. There's only so many players like I can put in them. Like, mock the draft has been the biggest priority for the Texans. Like, I joked, but in all seriousness, the 2022 Houston Texans were not a football team. They were a conduit to getting through the league year and receiving draft picks. Like, that was the sole purpose of the 2022 and 2021 Houston Texans, were to exist and receive compensation for being terrible. And it's like, oh, guys, like, hey, the football is way, way cooler than the draft now. And that's a good feeling. I like that.
It's good. It's a tough transition. Actually, we have a question from the chat. Aiden just showed up and he said the stream was short. So I guess I'll ask this question to help out Aiden. Thanks for joining us. What player do we need the most? I assume that's in reference to the draft, but if you're looking at the draft, you've looked at a lot of prospects, John, so I trust you have a really good answer. But if there's one player in the draft that you're like, Texan, like Pat Storm does, you know,
is this someone that I think will actually make it to their pick, or someone that I'm hoping the right combinations of things happen and that he falls to our pick?
He clarified what position. So
what position?
I mean, I think most of the players, I don't know. I would just say who's going to be available when we pick.
I kind of want the player now. I kind of want that
reasonably
name.
within the range, like understanding that Nick's probably going to trade up into the 30s, a player that'll be available at that point.
I think Kool-Aid McKinstry would be perfect for this football team. I would really, really like him here. He's a willing tackler. He is, like, where he excels in coverage is the quarters, man stuff. And I mean, what they're kind of telegraphing to us through the signings that they've made, especially CJ Henderson and Jeff Okudah, I think they want to play more man. I think they want to more willingly put their cornerbacks on an island with some of those cover four responsibilities. Like, maybe you're not going to give as much safety help for too high. And part of that is you've unlocked that with Derek Stingley. You think you can take away somebody. And I think if you have someone on the other side who they don't need to be as good at it, but hey, you want to run that kind of coverage menu, it would work. And I think Kool-Aid, from his willingness as a tackler to like where he excels in press and man, I would really like to see him on this team. And that's someone who usually when you read mock drafts, like, he gets taken around like 26, 27, 28, like 30.
He's a guy that I really liked at 23 when we had that
Yes,
pick.
I loved him at 23. He was my top choice when the cycle started. But if he falls down into the second round, I think that would be Texan. And then at 42 of guys that I'm very confident will be available, I wish there was a defensive lineman I loved. There's not. I wish there was a corner that I loved. I know Jason Braddock feels a little differently than me, but there's not a corner after round one where I'm like, they have to be here. They will be a day one clear upgrade over.
He's an Ennis Rakestraw guy. I've watched his take on him, and I really like Ennis Rakestraw.
He likes Rakestraw a lot. I'm probably not as comfortable there. Well, I don't need him that as badly. I would say Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M, who we talked about earlier. I do think that he brings a lot of tools this team would that they would really value. And I think he has that athletic profile that he can develop into that middle linebacker who eventually he's going to help you get the best out of Christian Harris. And that's when your defense can start to be absolutely terrifying, when both of your linebackers can take essentially any responsibility on the field.
No, yeah. I like the Edgerrin Cooper pick. I think personally, I know you spoke to how we're pretty well set at linebacker. I think the way I look at it, you got safety, most of the defense, right? There's some sort of depth that's needed, but I feel like after looking it over, I'm making a graphic that I want to release. I'm waiting because of the defense, honestly, till after the draft. But one of the things that stuck out to me is I looked at the linebacker room and I was like, dang, we should probably spend a high draft pick on a linebacker. Just it has to be a right fit though, and I've heard that D'Amico really likes Edgerrin Cooper. Yeah. I don't know if that's just.
I don't think they have to spend a high pick on a linebacker, but I think that this is where they're picking is probably the value spot that you could take the first linebacker in the draft and develop that guy. You're putting him into a great scenario, and it changes how you're going to be able to play on defense on earlier downs. You probably are going to be more comfortable in those three linebacker sets. It would just make sense. It'd be a very D'Amico Ryans pick, showed some good restraint last year, waiting until the fifth round of Henry To'oTo'o. Like, let the man eat. He spent a lot of money on the offense, albeit I guess really more money went to the defense. But the sexy trade was for Stephon Diggs. Let the big first draft pick be a D'Amico Ryans linebackers. I would not hate that.
No, yeah, 100%. Tom, I know I already asked you, but I guess we've had so much discussion since then. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share before we bring this thing down to a close?
I mean, if you're looking for me to say, I'm just ready for the draft. You already said it, so I'm not going to do it. You stole my thunder. John, thanks again. This has been a lot of fun. I always feel like anytime I can sit down with you or Jason or anybody that does all the draft stuff, it's always I come away with more than I ever came in with, draft knowledge. I can mock these things all I want, but I know you guys do the tape and I know you're at the Senior Bowl and I just can't be there. So for me, it's always a pleasure to sit down and spend some time. Appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you saying that. And thanks for having me on, guys.
Sweet. Well, John is, per his Twitter bio, the lead analyst at USA Today's Texans Wire. Puts out great content on there. So if you're not familiar, I mean, it's pinned on his profile. He interviewed J.J. Watt. So he's got, a lot of good stuff going on in that regard.
I'm interviewing Roman Wilson on Friday for anyone who might still be interested in a receiver. You might have heard of him, won a national championship helping out J.J. McCarthy. So I'm excited to talk to him, and hopefully we'll have some new content for people who like the draft stuff. All
right, sweet. John is at John H. Crumpler on Twitter. I believe it's at Texans Doc, DOC.
It's at John H. Crumpler. I'm thinking about changing it back now that I've maxed into residency and I don't feel my profile needs to be as professional. So TBD, but it's at John H. Crumpler for right now.
All right, sweet. And yeah, I mean, obviously if you want most up-to-date draft information for the Texans, and you like the analytical side and hearing other people's opinions on how fast and strong and schematically sound people are, the practitioner of draft content for the Texans is here, and you can find him on social media at those places. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. With the way the Astros game is going right now, you might need some Third Coast Tom therapy later there, so check in there for that. Or on Instagram at TCTom1. It's off private. It's public. You can follow him. You don't have to ask him anymore. You can just follow and he's there. I am at M1 Texans fan on all social media platforms. That's where you can find me, and that's how you can find the YouTube channel. If you want to watch, if you are interested in listening to this, it'll be available the next day on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans.